more resilient. At the end of this day, post-pandemic, I'm sure there are going to be a lot of new business models that are going to come about. Today, it's amazing in the last 6 months, the focus that I have seen in corporates all over the world on ESG, in my view, has only increased. I see a much greater narrative in the discussions around sustainability and ESG across different across different industries that I've never seen before. And it's interesting to see how companies are adopting different methodologies to adapt to this new environment. And what will be fantastic in today's discussion is as we go around the world from all the panelists from different parts of the world, is to get your perspectives on how are you thinking about ESG, how are you thinking about sustainability, and what concrete steps are you all taking in your industries and your countries to actually adapt to this new environment with regards to sustainability. I think by 2030, we'll have about 8.5 billion people in the world by 2030, of which about 1.5 billion people are going to be in India. And therefore, it's absolutely essential that we take concrete steps in this journey. But I think what I'm excited and happy to report is that we in India as a nation have really made dramatic steps and huge positive steps in this world of energy transition, sustainability, ESG, and the kind of innovation we're seeing in terms of renewables, new technologies coming in has been fascinating to see how we are moving towards our sustainable development goals. And I think given the fact that we've taken the lead in India, not only in terms of this goal of sustainability, but also in terms of identifying climate risks, setting science-based targets, and rethinking energy strategies. Also, in terms of building our own sustainability risk legal systems and processes in this new world. I think it's good to say that a large number of Indian corporates have jumped onto this bandwagon. And I really do believe that out of most of the developing nations and countries, we really have one of the greatest number of companies committed to science-based target initiatives. Therefore, now today, as I have this incredible panel in front of me, would also be great to get your perspectives. As this energy transition is happening, what are the impacts to make this whole energy transition more sustainable and resilient? From a perspective of capital requirements, is there a gap? Do we see a huge funding gap in funding all this new transition? Two, from a regulatory perspective, what additional regulatory steps do we expect governments and policies to be incurred to make this more sustainable? Three, what institutions do we need to create to make sustainability more solid? From an infrastructure perspective, what do we need to see? The other point that I see a huge gap as we move into this transition is human capital. As all of us focus in terms of developing more wind, solar, and other things in our country, do we have sufficient human capital, trained human capital in the world of ESG to make this whole revolution happen? And lastly, in terms of technology, each one of us in our own little fields are doing a lot in terms of technology. It'll be wonderful to hear whether it's from the auto sector, whether Giovanni from the railway sector, what are the steps each of you doing, each of you all are adopting in terms of driving this very, very critical topic. So with those introductory remarks, first of all, welcome again to everybody. I'd sort of like to turn it over to you, Alexander, if you don't mind, to really get your perspectives in terms of what positive steps are you all taking at BMW in terms of sustainability? What are the learnings from a European perspective in terms of tackling climate change? And how do you really bring more and more companies and industries onto the bandwagon? So with that, over to you, Alexander.
Thanks a lot. Is the audio working? Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Perfect. Great. Okay. Let me take a perspective from a company headquartered in Europe addressing sustainability. I really appreciate that you already pointed out the relevance of science-based targets if it comes to addressing climate change. So our CEO recently put it into these words: there's no premium without responsibility. So we decided to make sustainability and efficient resource management central to our strategic direction. We have been focusing on sustainability for a long time, and now this year in summer we took the next step and we set targets across our full value chain. So we are looking at our raw material sourcing, at our supply chain, at our own production in the use phase, and obviously also at recycling. So let me share a bit what we have been doing there. In our production, we have already a very efficient production network all over the world in the countries where we are operating. We are now increasing our ambition and setting a target, a science-based targets by 2030 of reducing our CO2 emissions by minus 80% based on the year 2019. We are starting already from a very efficient production network and now going even a step further of looking into measures around energy efficiency, looking into increasing our share of renewables, where we are already at 100% now. Now we are seeking how we can really get also an even better quality of renewables. We are looking into renewable heat. So there's a range of substance measures that we are taking. In addition to that, we have committed to go on a road to carbon neutrality, starting already in 2021, for those emissions that we cannot reduce substantially. So that's what we're doing in our production, and that's where we really seek to be a front runner, also in terms of our supplier network. So if it comes to our supplier network, obviously there's a huge CO2 footprint incorporated. So we have done the calculations also based on science-based target, and we currently see that for vehicles that you produce, there are around 10 tons of CO2 in our supplier network. As we are now focusing heavily on electrification, so this would increase to 14 tons by 2030, and we set ourselves a target of reducing it by 20%, so landing at 8 tons in 2030. So this is something that we also are going to address through the Science-Based Targets Initiative. So have been made our commitment there, are currently in the stage of getting these targets verified. And at the same time, internally, we are setting up a department within BMW Group, headquartered here in Munich in Germany, to steer our full supply chain with incorporating CO2 as a decision criteria, as we already obviously see on other criteria like quality and cost, like delivery time, etc. So this becomes a hard criteria of really being able to steer as well as to support our suppliers on this journey. If it comes to the use phase of our vehicles, where we currently obviously have the biggest footprint, we are going to reduce this footprint, also science-based target, by at least 40% to 2030. So we are increasing our offer of electric vehicles. Will immensely invest into that one, so that we can also get on that stage hitting the reducement that is required by science. We also set ourselves a long-term neutrality commitment, so that we will achieve two more aspects I would like to emphasize is the role of circular economy that we are going to see and that we need over the decade to come. So if we don't also go into the use of secondary materials, we won't be able to achieve the Paris climate commitment. And last point I would like to point out is the relevance of environmental and social standards in our supply chain. So we have high standards there, following the OECD due diligence processes, have been founding members of supply chain initiatives on aluminium, on steel, are also now getting into an initiative where we are really looking at the mining side, which is called IRMA, which is cross minerals, but because we seek to find guidance for our suppliers. They are saying what are the criteria that we as a business to consumer company would like to see as a brand company. So all this we are also tying to our management compensation. I'm glad that if you look at the capital markets and at those ratings like the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, that we regained our industry leadership #1 position in 2020. And so we are happy about that and see that this is also one of the drivers that we continue on our road to sustainability. It's not always easy, as you all know, there are target conflicts, but if you have the firm backup, what we have from our top management, from our CEO, as well as dedicated teams working within BMW, as well as with our partners, we are in a good way that we are achieving the targets that we set for 2030. So thanks for being able to make these remarks, and I hand over back to you.
Thanks so much, Alexander. Alexander, I just have one or two follow-up questions before I turn it over to other panelists. One is, I had no idea that BMW is looking not only at, it sounds as though BMW is looking at the entire supply chain, both at tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. So that's fantastic, because normally I would have thought that people would only look at tier 1, not at the entire supply chain. I heard you use the word minerals. So obviously you're going all the way down to source, all the way through to BMW. So would be fantastic to understand from you, what are the challenges you're seeing when you're trying to take and push something like this all through the value chain? Is it the lack of capital in your suppliers? Is it the recognition? So what are the challenges you're seeing in pushing your entire supply chain to come onto the same standards and levels that you at corporate headquarters have?
Yeah, that's a very important question. We already extended the scope of going beyond our boundaries quite a few years back, because if you look at the life cycle of our products, so they are only in our own production as well as logistics, they are only around 2 to 3% of CO2 emissions happening within our own scope. So if you look then in our end-tier supplier network, you already have today around 20-25% of our CO2 emissions. With electrification, with more CO2 intense materials like the high voltage batteries, this will also increase. So we early on said we need to look into the end-tier supplier network. Coming to your question, so it is most difficult to get transparency across the different tiers. So to really see how it's not just one supply chain. Obviously, we are already working with around 4,000 first-tier suppliers, and this multiplies. So currently, or in the past, it was very difficult to really understand which bauxite mine is mining materials that at the end of the day ends up in one of our cars. So the second piece is around methodology. So how do you calculate the CO2 footprint, if you look at it from a life cycle perspective, from cradle to gate, so from the mine to where we are coming in. But this is needed, and this will become even more critical in the future. So we have just seen in the European Commission a proposal for a battery regulation coming up that is requiring OEMs by 2024 to really be able to report across the full life cycle of the battery. So we expect that this will also get to the full vehicle. So this is why that we need to collaborate with initiatives like the Aluminium Stewardship Initiative, like the Responsible Steel Initiative, where we really get together, find together an approach, and not just to CO2, but also to social and governance criteria, to first find the right methodology, then to be able to have a kind of performance standard across the different stages, and then also to find a kind of chain of custody mechanism. As long as we are not there yet, we also found ways to do direct sourcing for our critical materials like cobalt, like lithium, where we know that this is coming from mines and factories that are complying to our standards. And at the same time also saying we also would like to see what is happening in a region like like in Congo, where we are currently engaged in a kind of development project together with the German Development Agency, together with partners from our supply chain, to find solutions on how to make the artisanal sourcing of cobalt compliant with environmental and social standards. So this is a pilot, a field project, but for us, these three steps of saying we need to get standardization and certification systems set up as the one thing, as long as we are not there to see can we do a direct procurement of those critical materials and also go into those regions where the standards are low and seeing how we can support the setup of standards in those regions.
Great. No, thanks so much for that, Alexander. That's great. And I'll come back to you later on, Alexander, with some more questions based on what you just mentioned. I'm just going to move the discussion on to my next panelist, Mr. Arun Sharma. Arun, would love to get your perspective, given how price sensitive a market India is, and given how challenging a market we are. In that environment, would love to get your perspective on how you are thinking about sustainability from a longer term perspective, and how can Indian companies adapt to a situation where we want to provide the highest standards of sustainability and ESG, yet at the same time we are struggling given the low cost market we live in. Over to you, Arun.
Well, thank you, Jaspreet. It's a pleasure to be among this panel. And I will answer your question. What I'll probably first do is provide a context for the Adani Group and its sustainability path. As you know, and for my international colleagues, Adani Group is India's largest energy and infrastructure player. In some way, the purpose of the group, as the chairman keeps telling, is nation building. India's infrastructure and energy have to be increased in a significant way if the population in India has to have a quality of life they deserve. Which also means that we have a responsible role to play in terms of the sustainability, because energy not only has to be affordable and accessible to all, but it also has to be clean increasingly. The group is a large energy player, as you know, thermal power and increasingly in renewables, in terms of transmission and distribution assets, and also gas grid, city gas distribution. So sustainability becomes a very important part of the group. What the group has been doing from a very early stage, whether it is investing in supercritical technology or ultra supercritical technology to reduce emissions, or even trying to insist on, getting coal from Australia, which will actually reduce the emissions of the thermal power plants, has been an important part of the game. Similarly, in India's sort of response to the Paris targets with renewable mix-up, the group has taken a leadership role, perhaps internationally, in building the renewable portfolio. The chairman has said that eventually the transition will be to renewables. And while currently our thermal assets, and if you look at the contracted assets in renewable, are very similar. And by 2025, the thermal assets are not likely to exceed more than 18 gigawatt, but that should be enough to have multiple layers of renewables going forward. And the chairman has set an aim of 25 gigawatt renewables by 2025. And he also has an aim to become the largest renewable company by 2030. So having said that, we know that we have to deliver, but this is where the business model comes in. If you look at this high concentration of renewables, clearly the issue of storage needs to be addressed. And the storage is in the long term and at a scale that we are talking about, hydrogen is the only sort of possibility. So we have started exploring hydrogen in a fairly significant way. But coming back to sustainability first, and I want to pick up on Alexander's point of science-based target initiative. The group is committed to sustainability. We are undertaking a carbon mapping exercise, so we understand exactly where our emissions are, where some of the planet-related metrics are, and we will, help India achieve its responsibility in terms of where it will be going. So far as the business model is concerned, if you look at it, the price sensitivity that you have talked about is actually an issue. So sustainability in companies initially starts with compliance, where it's a cost center, and the executives themselves are not that excited about it. But over time, it becomes a business process improvement, where we are able to reduce fuel cost, we are able to reduce certain things. So for example, Adani Group was able to use the thermal heat from Mundra power plants to to chill the air conditioning facilities for the solar panel manufacturing. And that was an innovation that allowed to have the business perform in a better way, in a more efficient way. But ultimately, the business models are actually around new business models that you can do. And this is where there are a few things that will make difference. Obviously, eventually, and especially in Europe, a price on carbon will make sustainability as a new business model as part of the normal business strategy. The intersection of low renewable power and digitalization, which actually matches supply and demand with customers, will drive new business models. And we can discuss this more further about what kind of technologies. But eventually, if you look at things like hydrogen, although at a price of $4 US a kilogram for green hydrogen in India right now, that's the estimate, it is not that far from diesel, like at a retail level. So if there were certain incentives, and this is where regulation has to play an important role, at least from an OpEx perspective, we are not far in terms of hydrogen. Of course, the CapEx is a different matter, and I'll come to that. So if you look at what kind of incentives make sense for a country like India, well, first, everyone talks about emissions, but India, like, before the latest UN emissions report came, it was one of the few G20 countries on track to meet its Paris emission. And yes, emissions should be an incentive attached to it, but the Western world has to focus more on that than India. The bigger problem in India that we are facing is the problem of air pollution, okay, in our cities. And that is different from, as you know, greenhouse gas emissions. It's about SOx and NOx. And this, an incentive towards cleaner fuel and battery electric vehicle, and the ramp up is a very important point. But similarly, at the end of mobility, like trucks and buses, where the infrastructure cost can be ameliorated, an incentive linked to air quality might also help. And similarly, COVID has demonstrated, as our chairman likes to say, how critical our supply chain securities are. So some incentive that allows, like, green hydrogen to convert into methanol is going to be quite important. Similarly, like, you can convert biomass into hydrogen, and that can create rural, like, jobs. So a little combination of all these incentives is going to make new business models possible. And these incentives have to work for India. They cannot be because someone else is lecturing them, like, that this is the incentive that you should apply. But there are enough incentives that India can put that little by little, we actually can leapfrog. And finally, I just want to end up by saying why this makes sense. India does not have a lot of oil. India does not have a lot of natural gas. India does not have uranium. Our hydroelectric capability cannot expand significantly simply because there are ecological problems. Renewable energy and our biomass are two of the resources that we have in abundance. And providing the right incentives so that we can leapfrog from thermal power to a renewable world is what the Adani Group is about. And is this what's going to make India's dream become a reality?
Great.
So
No, thanks so much. No, thanks so much, Arun. Really appreciate that. And thanks for that perspective. Arun, I'll just ask you one or two clarification questions
Sure.
and just take the discussion a little larger.
Yeah.
I think there is no doubt about it that our country's done a fabulous job in getting onto the sustainability wagon in terms of renewables investments, and the government's also done a great job in providing the necessary framework to really push the world of renewables in our country. Now, taking one step above, Arun, what are the challenges you see? For example, just taking it not only about India from a global perspective, we all know the quantum of capital we need. I think somebody mentioned to me that only in Asia, we would need close to $400 billion a year to try to get to SDG targets. Now, where is all this capital going to come from? Number one, I'd love to get your perspectives.
Sure.
Two, do you see a large financing gap? And number three, one of the challenges I see across the world, not only in India, is that the cost of energy has come down dramatically. Personally, my first solar project I put up was at 18 rupees a kilowatt hour, which was roughly about 25 US cents. And my first wind project was 6 rupees 50, which is about, just under 10 US cents. As all of us know today, in India, we have one of the lowest costs of solar and wind at around the 2 to 250 rupees range, which is 3 US cents. And therefore, one of the challenges I see is that while it's phenomenal and exciting to see the kind of interest levels and investments coming in, but do you see a little bit of a challenge that as returns, not only in India, but globally come down, do you see that becoming a little bit of a challenge for our ability to keep on attracting capital as returns squeeze? So in short, Arun, availability of capital and economics and returns, do you see that as becoming a challenge to drive this energy transition and sustainability?
I think it'll always be a challenge, but I think there are ways forward. So let me give you some examples. Like, for renewable energy, like, obviously green bonds and those instruments are actually available for companies that can execute and do that. So that is definitely available, but that's not going to be enough. One of the things that developing countries like India have to actually insist as part of the Glasgow, summit is the Western sort of promise of $1 trillion in the transition investment has not gone anywhere. Okay, that is still forthcoming. So that is still and a country like India are probably pulling their weight more than most Western countries in terms of meeting their targets. So there is a case for that funding. Now, if you look at that funding, and if you look at green bonds, and then if you look at public funding in India, and then looking at some of the corporate funding, the concept of transition bonds, that is, you are actually going to move, say, from if you're going to capture carbon dioxide and you're going to do utilization, make methanol or chemicals, it's an expensive process. But can the transition bonds assist with that process that actually reduces the global emissions and allows supply chain security for countries like India? And so those are the innovative ways that we have to, to push for it. It is and can I just tell you that there is actually a fundamental problem in terms of what countries take to the UN COP. That's a target. Then what we have organizations like TCFD doing great work, and they have so for example, if you want to become carbon neutral, you actually have to reduce your emissions. You can't use offsets for becoming carbon neutral. Now, it's perfectly fine for a Western country, but for a country like India, where our per capita energy consumption is less than half of the world average, and it has to triple, according to the IEA, for us to even have a quality of life that is acceptable. So that automatically puts you on the back foot. Then you have financing agencies that follow organizations like TCFD to put that. And so unless there is an alignment at Glasgow that if your revenues are coming from the developing world, then you have to sort of look at those challenges. And you see, we need a system where there is a cooperation so that everyone understands what they are contributing. And that alignment is going to be important if we are going to reach our targets. So I hope I have tried to answer your question.
Great. No, thanks so much for that, Arun. Appreciate that. Just moving on to you, Giovanni, would love to get your perspective because rails all over the world play a critical role and more so in our country as well. Would love to get your perspectives and in terms of, what can we learn from some of the best practices you all have adopted out in Italy and in Europe? How can we learn from that? And how can we build upon those technologies or systems or processes that you have adopted? Over to you, Giovanni.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think that the topic of today is very, very important. Let me just introduce Italian Railway. Italian Railway in Italy is one of the biggest companies. We are talking about 83,000 employees with investing every year more than 8 billion euro. We have a network very small compared to the Indian network because we are around 17,000 kilometers, but with 2,000 kilometers of high speed. We are the only company that has in our group also the road and the highway. around the world. And our company is a very huge group with the buses inside and other companies abroad. So we have the control of two companies in Germany. As Alexander probably knows, Netinera, 100% of the company belongs to Italian Railway. Netinera is the second operator in Germany. And TX Logistic is the second freight operator in Germany, belongs to us. So we have also the operator in Greece. The only operator in Greece is Trenose, 100% of us. And we have a company also in Holland, in Netherlands, a bus company there. We have an important company in UK. We bought C2C, that is the company that connects London with the South Essex, and we won the tender towards against Virgin. Now we are the operator between London and Edinburgh. So you can imagine it's a company, a railway company, but not only a railway company that has a presence in 5 continents with an office also in India, in New Delhi and in Mumbai. Let me enter in the topic of today. The topic of today is sustainability and new business model. So I have prepared a short presentation that I want to share with you. Okay, let me do this. Non la vedo. Okay. So I gave the focus on the mode of transport. So let we start with the first chart. So contribution of the transport sector emission to the pollution. So with these diagrams, you can see on the left side the CO2 grams emitted for passenger kilometers. And on the right side, CO2 grams emitted for ton kilometers, for freight. It's very interesting, the comparison between aviation, road transport, and train. So the emission of CO2 of the train modality of transport is very, very low compared to the other one. And also for freight is interesting the comparison with road, maritime, inland, and rail. Okay, again, also in this case, it's very low, the contribution of CO2 by rail. With the other diagram, you can see the share of transport greenhouse gas emission in European Union. With the orange, you can see the aviation. With the yellow, you can see the maritime. And the rest, the gray, is, of course, road. And the train is very, very low emission, 0.5. And then there is the analysis of every single contribution of gas, so CO2, but not only CO2. In every case, train is very, very low. So with this chart, you can understand that the most sustainable mode of transport is train. Let me go further. I made an analysis between New Delhi and Mumbai. There is a website. I suggest you to go to the website because it's very interesting. It was realized by all the European railway companies. The name is Ecotransit World. And if you put the distance between one place to the other one, the site can give you the contribution of CO2, of the emission. So we are talking about a trip, you know very well, of course, 1,400 kilometers. And it's very clear the contribution of train compared to airplane and truck. Okay, in energy consumption, but also in freight emission. let me go further in the evaluation. It's not only the sustainability on the emission, it's also the sustainability of the rolling stock, you know, the instruments of the traffic. So we decided in our group to put in place a new high-speed train, our flagship train, ETR 1000. So this train is with the environmental impact certification, EPD, that is almost 100% recyclable. With this train, we obtain the green bonds in order to realize this train. So just to certify that this is 100% recycled. So that's definitely the evolution of the contribution of the train mode of transport to the world. So find the best way to reduce the impact. Okay, with this approach, we decided a few years ago to enter in India. So we put in place a strategy to meet the Indian railway modernization approach. So actually, India railway system is the fourth largest in the world, okay? Third largest electrified railway system. There are metro railway systems in 10 large cities, and several additional metro railway systems are planned. 2 dedicated freight corridors, 1 high-speed rail line. So I know that you know probably everything about that, but this is just to give you the framework of India for rail aspect. So Indian railway carrier 3.04 million tons of freight and 22.4 million of passengers every day. So it's enormous number of passengers and freight. Indian railway system is playing a fundamental role in the country development, transporting people and goods through its vast territory, integrated markets and connected communities. So that means I want to declare that it's almost a backbone in the country. So definitely is a mode of transport very, very important for the country. And with this perspective, Indian Railways has recently been the subject of a number of high-level strategic reviews. So now there is a plan that is transformation strategy on railway, the key elements of which can be seen as a bottom-up strategy targeting the focus area: marketing, customer, business management, network investment, and structural change. So there is a strategy at the governmental level to increase the level of railway and the safety mainly there. With the approach of safety, Via dello Stato and the Ministry of Railways, Indian Railways, we signed an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, in January 2017, with mainly focus on the upgrading of the safety level of the Indian Railways through review of management and control process, certification of technology based on safety integrity level, and training. So with this framework and with our strategy, we decided to put in place a branch in New Delhi with our control company Italfer, our engineering company in New Delhi. Why we did so? We did so because Italfer won several contracts in the country. I just want to mention the first one, that was strategic one, was the MGK Bridge project. That was the project very difficult for engineering aspect. It's a bridge, I don't know if you know the area, it's in direction of Kashmir region. So it has many importance there for many regions. We work in partnership with Icon International Limited. It's an Indian company. And it's a very difficult project because it was in an area in which our previous The previous engineering company decided to give up because it was too difficult to realize. Then, just to mention, last acquisition was Kanpur and Agra metro lines. It's a very, very important project. It's around $50 million, and for Ital Ferries, $14 million. So it's an important project. And then regional rapid Delhi Meerut train, the dedicated Eastern freight corridors, Mumbai Metro, and so on. So it's several of important projects, and we are our plan is to remain in the country to work for the development of the country. Then we are not only with the engineering company, but we are also with the certificator. Ital Certifer is our control company for certification. Is a competitor of Lloyd's in UK, of TÜV in Germany, and so on. They are working in many areas, Mumbai and so on, and also with FS International, with the support of the Italian government. We are planning to work on the Delhi Jaipur project for the upgrading of the level. So that's the plan of what we are doing in the country. And of course, I'm ready for every question that you would like to ask to me.
Great. No, thanks so much for that, Giovanni, and thanks so much for sharing your plans in India. Just a very quick question from my side before I turn it over to Anirban. From a technology perspective, while it's absolutely clear to all of us on this call the benefits of rail in terms of CO2 emissions, etc., what we do is use a lot of AI and IoT in driving efficiencies from a sustainability perspective in the railways. For example, our company, what we put is sensors and gateways under the railway wagons or railway coaches, get a lot of the data out to be able to reduce maintenance costs and reduce efficiencies in utilization. So would love to get your perspective on just one or two critical elements from a technology perspective that you use to drive sustainability within the railways. If you could just make your answer short, then I'll turn it over to Anirban. Over to you, Giovanni.
Okay. So technology is definitely one of the pillars for the evolution of the trains. In the last 10 years, we have invested around 50 billion euro in technology. The main aspect, of course, but India is in a very good position, is the electrification of the lines. So electrification of the lines means new technology, new speed, the possibility to increase the speed of the train. Everybody knows that the maximum speed with the diesel traction is less than 200 kilometers per hour. With the electric trains, you can reach 360, like our train ETR 1000. So the almost close to 400. So you can imagine how different it is. The technology is not only that. Technology is also ticketing. In Italy, almost no one goes to the station to buy the ticket. So we use the laptop to buy the ticket, and the ticket is on our smartphone. The technology is also safety and security. We start with safety. Safety means diagnostic. We have every day and mainly every night trains that are running on the network, checking the condition of the infrastructure in order to avoid any accident. So this dramatic change, the maintenance approach of the infrastructure, in the sense that with the technology, you can identify the specific point in which there is a problem and send there the technicians in order to fix up the point. Security is the future, not only the future, also the actuality. So we have some control in the station in order to identify persons that are bringing bombs. So there are some systems. Yeah. Or there is the recognition of the face There are the system that can recognize if someone is already listed, or for the future could be also the possible ticketing approach with the face, without the ticket at all. So, you know, we have created last year a dedicated company for that. It's FS Technology. They are playing this role on the evolution of technology, not only for the group, but also so we are working about it. I hope that I replied to your question.
Thanks so much, Joe. Thanks for that. Anyone, over to you. I know Mahindra is doing a lot on EV, on transportation, on sustainability. Would love to get your perspectives, and specifically on the mobility side. How do you see that all panning out, given the importance of that from a country perspective and its impact on sustainability? Over to you, Anirban.
Thank you, Tejpreet. I must begin by thanking Alexander, because when he was speaking, it almost seemed to me that I was listening to my sustainability report being read out. And then to mining. And so I realized, where does my sustainability report have to go next? Because we were definitely not there as of now. So the story of sustainability in an automotive business, you've heard very well from BMW. So I will not repeat that. Let me mention one or two things. One of the things that before COVID came in, we were all in pursuit of economic well-being with some effort to take social well-being along. And many of us were struggling to get environmental well-being incorporated into that. Then came COVID, disruption. Suddenly we had economic well-being disrupted. We had health and well-being disrupted. But we had environmental well-being showing up outside our windows, in the forests, in the rivers, and so on. Two things were clear: that you cannot be sustainable without all three kinds of well-being happening together, and that there is a direct connection of economic well-being on the absence of environmental well-being. As we were hurtling along, in our pursuit of growth, while there was some tacit to that connection, the connection became much more clear. And therefore, the expectation that there will be newer business models or newer partnerships is probably a more real expectation now. Tejpreet, you've been asking the question, do we have the human capital? Do we have the money, or do we have enough of the money? The short answer is we don't have enough of anything now. But the real question is, are we using what we have sufficiently? And there, I think there is still some way to go, because some people are indeed using, and you're hearing some of the stories today, but many more need to be making much more of what is available for our journey, for our climate journey, to reach its ultimate goal. Permit me to disconnect the phone. My car is supposed to come back from the service station, and I'm very sure that it will come exactly when I'm speaking. So we will deal with that. So yes, so are we using enough of what we have, and are we doing enough? So you've heard some stories today. The Mahindra Group, has committed to being carbon neutral. It has committed to science-based targets, just as 1,000 other companies around the world. But the important thing is, what is the rate at which progress is happening? I'm very happy to tell you that just prior to this, I was at our sustainability conference of our auto and farm business. And the business, according to the records that is keeping, is now calls itself 34% carbon neutral from where they started out from. So it's a short journey so far, and we've already reached 34%. We are not counting any offsetting, because if we take the 17 million trees we've planted, we'll be way beyond 34%. The energy efficiency program is a very big program, and today we make a vehicle with half the power than we did 5 or 6 years ago. But that's because we've got this huge partnership with Energy Efficiency Services Limited, and we have a carte blanche for them to try out every new technology at our factory. If it works, we'll adopt it at scale, and they're free to take it to other industries as well. If it doesn't work, well, we learn something from the technology as they will, and maybe that will become better going forward. So there are, however, most of the conversations, and even on our panel today, you've heard things which can broadly be said about, broadly be called as greening the business. You had a business, how do you reduce the footprint? How do you green it? But there is another side to this whole thing, which is what are the new green businesses that the world needs to be able to reach the climate goals that it wishes to reach. And there, Arun very nicely explained how Adani wants to become the largest renewable energy company in the world. That is definitely one critical green business, but there are many more. For example, we must build green buildings only, because green buildings reduce footprint by 30-40% of a building. And today, green buildings don't cost any extra to build. And I'm saying that because that's what my construction company tells me. So if it doesn't cost extra to build and it has this huge climate impact, why are we building anything other than green? That business has to grow exponentially. There are many more businesses like this in the space of circular economy, let's say. We are looking to see whether the scrappage policy comes, which it should come at some time. Not for any other reason, but that scrappage policy will be great for the country from a climate perspective, from an employment perspective, from an economy perspective. The future vehicles that will come onto the road will have far lower emissions. There'll be much better technology and so on. So there are many such green businesses, green buildings, cloud computing, micro irrigation, better batteries, and plenty of them. And the Mahindra Group has invested in a few, including waste to energy, because those are the businesses of the future. And figuring out the business models on how those businesses can stand on their own feet is the big experiment that's happening in our country today. And I call it an experiment because these are all just starting out. And we know when new businesses start out, you've got to do experiments, you learn, and then you modify and you move on. And then when an industry does get started, we see mergers, acquisitions, we see growth. There are different stages of the industry. And the same thing will happen for the green industries as well. But right now, they are all sort of startups. They're all doing experiments. They're all figuring out which is the right business model to follow. How much of government intervention do you need? How much do you not need? The good thing is, once they stand on their feet, then you don't need regulation anymore. But you do need regulation when a technology is in its nascent stages, hasn't yet stood on its economic feet, but is just about getting there. So a little bit of regulation can push you forward and get that technology adopted faster than it would get adopted otherwise. And faster is important because, we've been in the industry long enough. We've seen many new things developing. It has a S-curve sort of formation. But the beginning of the S-curve is a long one when the industry sort of incubates and incubates and incubates and then takes off in the growth phase. When it comes to green industries, we don't unfortunately have the time for it to play out in the regular way that it plays out. We've got to solve all these problems within this century and try and solve them in the first half of the century. And that's why it is important to push, say, batteries and renewable energy and electric vehicles and so on. Keeping this in mind, we've got into a lot of partnerships, some with government. One is with Ford. The effort is to try and see how can we bring these technologies to market faster? How can we accelerate the pace in which emissions or the footprint of the country can be brought down? Let me stop at that stage, Preet. I hope it addresses the question that you began with.
Thanks so And you made some excellent points. I think a couple of key points that you mentioned was one is I love the fact about greening the business, but it's not only about greening the business, it's about future business models for future greening, green business ideas. I think I love your point about the fact that it's not going to be one technology, it's going to be all technologies, a little bit of battery, a little bit of storage, a little bit of automotive, all of that has to come together to help this energy transition. But I also loved your point about partnerships. At the end of the day, I think the challenge for our country and the world is so large that it's going to require competitors coming together. You talked about Mahindra and Ford coming together, and I'm sure those are the kinds of partnerships. And I know the Adani Group has also developed some fantastic partnerships from people around the world to invest in this whole sustainable transition that's happening all over the world. I think, Anirban, what we've been trying to do is in one of our companies to use technology, a lot of AI and IoT to in the existing buildings, existing factories, to digitize the entire building and the entire factory by putting sensors and gateways in the HVAC, chillers, boilers, compressors, and then use AI to drive energy efficiency. So I think I love the fact that all these things are coming together. And Ibrahim, one more question to you, and then I'll start opening it up to the crowd because I know we only have 15, 20 minutes to go. And just for everybody in the audience, please keep posting your questions as they come along, and I'll be happy to ask all the partnerships. But Anirban, you made a very good point, which is on one hand, you have large corporates like yourself, like Adani Group, like BMW, that are really taking this very seriously because you have the resources, the scale, the ability to move the needle and make a difference. How can smaller companies or startups that are doing such incredible work partner up with some of these big companies to take it to the next level? I'd love to get your perspective, and then I'll open it up to Arun and to Alexander as well to get their perspectives on how they see these partnerships moving forward. Over to you, Anirban.
I will tell you a couple of things we are trying, Tejpreet. But before I go there, let me mention the impact of the AI and IoT work that y'all are doing so well that we have observed. You know, you take a building and you put all the energy efficient devices, you achieve maybe 30 to 40% efficiencies. You put in AI and IoT, that can go up to 60, 65%, 70% efficiencies. That's the kind of acceleration AI and IoT can give us. In fact, one of our businesses, which had committed to doubling energy productivity in 25 years, did so in 4 years, simply because it adopted AI and IoT at scale, along with all the other energy efficiency technologies. So I'm very glad that you keep mentioning AI and IoT because of the accelerative effect that it has. Now, when it comes to the smaller organizations, let me talk a little bit about the MSMEs. So a lot of our suppliers are MSMEs, and the dominant dialogue is OEM, go to MSME, get them to do what they are supposed to do, because otherwise either they don't know or they won't be able to. This is partially correct. It has some impact. And yes, of course, all OEMs, BMW, us, we make our effort. Some suppliers listen, some don't listen so much, but the game goes on. But to make this a wider program, we partnered with an organization called Institute for Sustainable Communities. They had worked in China before they came to India. And their way of working is to go to these MSMEs, first build capacity, and then show them what are the changes they can make, which will help reduce their cost, manage their risk, make them more environment friendly, perhaps even get business from international clients who look at things like this. So the partnership with ISC helped us work with 400 such MSMEs around the country, some of which were ours, but many of them belonged to, were suppliers of other companies and were in other industries as well. I'm glad that they are continuing to do this work because this is something that's now been planted in the country. The second thing I wanted to mention is that CII and other industry bodies and chambers of commerce all talk about making a difference to MSMEs. So whichever committees that I'm a part of, where we talk about MSMEs, we say, okay, let's take a few through this chamber of commerce or this industry body and help them build an ESG framework and an ESG program so that at the end of the year, we have at least whatever is our bandwidth, whether it is 10, whether it is 20, whether it is 50, that many fellows have got going already. In a few years' time, we will have many more, and then it will become an ecosystem which will become self-sustaining. Because once they discover that, energy efficiency, not doing energy efficiency is actually burning money, or not adopting renewable energy is like burning money, then our entrepreneurs are not stupid. They will obviously do the right thing once they taste blood, shall we say.
Great. No, thanks so much for that. Alexander, I'm going to bring you into the conversation, Alexander. Would love to get your perspective in terms of how are you seeing things at BMW in terms of helping partners, small company, big companies, universities. How are you getting the benefit of all these companies into BMW to drive a sustainability going forward?
खाने पीने के शौकीन तो हम सब ही हैं। दिसंबर आते ही पार्टियों का दौर भी शुरू हो जाता है। कोरोना संक्रमण के कारण इस साल वैसा दौर तो नहीं चलेगा, लेकिन तब भी लोगों ने लॉकडाउन में अपने परिवार के बीच खास डिश पकाने की प्लानिंग कर ही ली थी। खाने पीने का ये दौर काफी लंबा होगा, लेकिन फ्रांस इस मामले में सबसे आगे है। वहाँ रोजाना औसतन 2 घंटे 13 मिनट खाने को दिया जाता है। त्योहारों के सीजन में ये और लंबा खिंचता है।
किसान आंदोलन पर ये सुप्रीम कोर्ट की अहम टिप्पणी, क्योंकि दरअसल जो याचिकाएं दाखिल की गई हैं सुप्रीम कोर्ट में,
ऑर्गेनाइजेशन फॉर इकोनॉमिक कॉर्पोरेशन एंड डेवलपमेंट ने दुनिया के कई देशों के लोगों की प्रवृत्ति और जीवन शैली से संबंधित आंकड़े पेश किए, जिसमें ये पता चला। वैसे फ्रांस की डाइट लंबे समय से हेल्दी डाइट का मॉडल रही। वो बैलेंस्ड डाइट लेते हैं। इसमें हरी सब्जियों और फलों के साथ टमाटर और ऑलिव्स जैसी चीजें खूब खाई जाती है। आमतौर पर फ्रांस में परिवार के हर एक सदस्य के लिए अलग से डाइट होती है, जो उनकी शारीरिक मानसिक जरूरतों के हिसाब से होती है। ये देश मेडिटेरियन डाइट पर निर्भर है, जिसमें मछली, सी फूड, ऑलिव्स, सब्जियां और फल शामिल हैं। मेडिटेरियन डाइट साल 1960 में दिल की बढ़ती बीमारियों को ध्यान में रखकर शुरू हुई थी, जिसकी लोकप्रियता बढ़ती चली गई। अब यूरोप के कई देश इसे लेते हैं। यहाँ पर बिगर इज बेटर का कॉन्सेप्ट है, यानी यहाँ रुक कर छोटे हिस्सों में खाना खाया जाता है।
किए जाने की बात सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने कही, लेकिन
इसके बाद नंबर आता है इटली का। यहाँ रोज औसतन 2 घंटे 7 मिनट खाने को लोग देते हैं। इस यूरोपियन देश के खाने का पैटर्न भी फ्रांस से मिलता जुलता है। यहाँ लोग खाने पीने के बेहद शौकीन हैं और साल भर देश के किसी न किसी हिस्से में कोई खास फूड फेस्टिवल चलता रहता है। तीसरे नंबर पर स्पेन है, जहाँ खाने को ईश्वर का वरदान कहा जाता है और कोई भी खाना छोड़कर नहीं उठता। यही कारण है कि फूड वेस्ट के मामले में ये या फिर दूसरे यूरोपीय देश एशिया या अमेरिका से पीछे हैं।
सुप्रीम कोर्ट में इस मामले पर सुनवाई चल रही है।
चौथे नंबर पर दक्षिण कोरिया है, जहां लोग 1 घंटा 45 मिनट खाने को देते हैं। कोरिया में खाने और सोने को काफी तरजीह मिलती है और यही वजह है कि वहां खाने को लेकर लोग काफी आक्रामक भी हैं। हाल ही में इस देश ने चीन पर अपनी एक पारंपरिक डिश किमची चोरी करने का आरोप भी लगाया था। वैसे दक्षिण कोरिया और उत्तर कोरिया डिशें लगभग समान हैं। यही कारण है कि दोनों देशों के बीच जब भी शांति की कोई पहल हुई, उस दौरान मेन्यू पर खास ध्यान दिया गया, जो दोनों के बीच पुल का काम करे।
आम लोगों का जो अधिकार है कि किस तरह से वो एक जगह
चीन का खाना भी कोरियाई देशों से मिलता जुलता है, लेकिन चीन में पश्चिमी शैली के साथ भी स्थानीय प्रयोग किया जाता है, जिससे वहाँ का असल स्वाद खो जाता है। साथ ही चीन में खाना पकाने की प्रक्रिया पर कम समय देना सही माना जाता है। यही कारण है कि कई डिशों में होने वाले फर्मेंटेशन जैसी प्रक्रिया को वो जैसे तैसे पूरा करते हैं। वैसे चीन इस लिस्ट में 5वें नंबर पर है, जहां रोज औसतन 1 घंटा 40 मिनट खाने को दिया जाता है। लगभग 1 घंटा 35 मिनट के साथ जर्मनी खाने पर समय देने वालों की लिस्ट में छठा देश है।
प्रदर्शन का जो संवैधानिक
इसके तुरंत बाद जापान का नंबर आता है। इस देश का खाना हेल्दीएस्ट माना जाता है। दूसरे विकसित देशों में अलग यहाँ के लोग बाहर खाना कम ही पसंद करते हैं। यहाँ अधिकतर लोग घर पर भाप में पका खाना या ग्रिल्ड फूड लेते हैं।
साथ यहाँ पर अधिकार जो है वो आम लोगों का भी कहीं ना कहीं
इसके बाद ऑस्ट्रेलिया और फिर 9वां नंबर हमारा यानी कि भारत का है, जहां लोग औसतन 1 घंटा 24 मिनट खाने पर देते हैं। हालांकि खाने की तैयारियों में भारत में ज्यादा समय बिताया जाता है। इसकी वजह ये भी है कि हम ज्यादातर बाहर खाने से परहेज करते हैं और घर पर अधिकतर महिला सदस्य ही खाना पकाती हैं। ये बात भी कई रिसर्च में दिख चुकी है कि भारतीय महिलाएं अवैतनिक कामों में पुरुषों से अधिक समय देती है।
तो प्रदर्शन से किसी को दिक्कत नहीं होनी चाहिए, ये सुप्रीम कोर्ट की ओर से टिप्पणी की गई है।
डाउनलोड इट नाउ।
और नियमों के खिलाफ प्रदर्शन का संवैधानिक अधिकार है। प्रदर्शन का संवैधानिक अधिकार
in the mining sector. A lot of these large companies like BHP and Rio have done excellent work in innovation and automation, but they all have their own closed platforms. So a SME or an entrepreneur has to sell to each of them differently. And then I love OEMs, but the OEMs become gatekeepers to the actual corporates. So sectors and regions that create an open innovation system where you can standardize certain things. So you take the example of green buildings. So if the sustainability challenges in green buildings, if the industry as a whole comes together and says, these are the problems we face, this is where innovation is needed, and this is the challenge we're going to throw, and we are going to adopt a common standard, so an entrepreneur doesn't have to sell just to me or go via a third party. They are selling and building their innovation to a common standard. Countries and regions that have been able to do this have succeeded. Because much of this architecture doesn't exist in India, like, we are in an amazing situation that we can set these policies, we can get all our green buildings, the companies that are big players, okay, identify your challenges, let us create a common standard, and let's throw a global competition, and our entrepreneurs can compete. And this is how you close the gap. But ultimately, if all this is not going to create a sustainable, sustainability-driven technology revolution in India, then we are shortchanging ourselves.
Yeah, no, Arun, fantastic. Completely agree with you. And I love the fact that creating an environmental ecosystem is really going to be fantastic. And I think that's the responsibility for large corporates in our country to help encourage that. And I love the fact that you said that it's the responsibility of large corporates to encourage these smaller companies to create that whole, an ecosystem to help each other to grow. We only have about another 15 minutes left, but I'll try to quickly start wrapping things up. Giovanni, any perspectives from your side in terms of how your company has actually helped encourage innovative ideas in terms of sustainability and helping this ecosystem be created in Italy?
Okay, yeah. Our approach is door-to-door approach. So, as you have understood with my presentation, we do not have only railway. Railway for us is, of course, the backbone of the group. But we have also bus. We have also the connection with the roads and so on. So I think that not only in Italy, but also in Europe and probably is the future for India, is to identify the more eco-sustainable transport for every mode of transport. So, for instance, we bought a company, I mentioned before, in Netherlands. Why we bought a company of bus in Netherlands? Because this was the only company that has a fleet completely electric and hydrogenous buses. So this means that you can serve your customer from the house to the final destination with the eco mode of transport. So starting with the bus or with the car sharing or with the bikes goes to the railway station, take the train, and with the final mile with another system, eco-sustainable. So this is I think, the best approach, door-to-door, eco-sustainable.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Giovanni. I'm going to ask Anirban and Alexander a little bit of a provocative question, right? And I'd love to hear your answer. Given where Tesla stock is going, and you both are represent, two major automakers in your country, it's been just out, there's no words to describe how that stock price, and I was seeing a chart today that shows that the market capitalization of Tesla is greater than the sum of virtually most major auto component manufacturers or automakers. So would love to get your perspectives. I know both BMW and Mahindra have done a lot in terms of getting onto the EV bandwagon. You've got your cars, you've got your technology. I'd love to get your perspective in terms of what are the challenges OEMs like you all have. Is it because Tesla was able to start with a clean piece of paper and jump straight to what the new technology is, number one? And two, what lessons learned can all of us have from this experience? And all of us who have traditional businesses, how do we manage this transition when you have a new startup that comes in with a new technology that completely disrupts the way we did our own businesses? So I don't know, Anirban or Alexander, which one of you want to kick it off, but I'll turn it over to you, Alexander, if you want to kick it off, and then I'll turn it over to you, Anirban.
That's a very good question, and probably as you already mentioned, so the traditional OEMs have a history and legacy of 100 years or something more, and a new player, Tesla, who is now really focusing from the very first start on electrification, is something else. So we have been pursuing electrification at BMW early on, started in 2007 with our Project I, which then the BMW i car came to the market in 2013, and we already made that car as sustainable as possible, really taking a life cycle approach. So we already looked there, how can we really massively get down CO2 emissions, which also depends a lot on the range we put in a car if it comes to the battery, as well as also on designing it from the interior, that it is really a sustainable car, also from the materials that we include. And now we are getting on with our electrification strategy. So we believe that we can currently provide the customers the power of choice of what they really want to drive for their needs in the most sustainable way.
Anirban, you're on mute.
Deshpreet, when it comes to the stock price, maybe you will have to help us understand this. While Tesla will probably make money, you have a company like Uber which says we've never made money, we will probably never make money, but then the stock price just, flies. You have Amazon, biggest company, huge company, richest person in the world, never made money, but massive valuation. So frankly, I don't understand all of this. If you made some money out of it, good for you. I'm anyway not good on the stock markets. But when it comes to industry, I guess what's happening in the auto industry is what Clayton Christensen always said, that the disruption will come from an outsider and not from an insider. So it's happening once again. I'm hoping that it won't lead to, let me put it in another way. This is actually such a big change in technology that industry structure is bound to change within the next decade. I don't think we quite realize today's non-connected industries who can suddenly become connected to automobiles. Because if I look at the current automobile, the expertise of building the engine will become irrelevant. What will remain is the expertise of building the transmission and the suspension. So those who build transmission, suspension will survive. Now, OEMs typically do nothing with the transmission. They just buy it and stick it in. Suspension, yes, there is some amount of work that is done depending on the design for the vehicle. But like Tesla showed, it's not so much of rocket science. It can be done. And the way Tesla approached it is, let's make a vehicle which is better than the alternatives which people have, The fact that it is electric or battery operated is purely incidental. So when I get into a Tesla in, say, Netherlands or in some other country, and usually I try to take one ride to the airport in a Tesla, and I talk to the chaps who own the vehicle, very few of them talk about the fact that it is battery operated. They talk about the fact that it's great to drive, that the screen is awesome, that it's very easy to maintain, and that it's, you know, it's a good experience to have the vehicle. I did hear some of the taxi drivers say that the seat is not very comfortable, in the sense that when they drive for 10 hours, 12 hours, they get more tired in the Tesla than they would probably get in a BMW. They do say things like that, but then I'm sure Tesla can deal with that issue very, very soon. I do hope that companies like ours will be able to hit value propositions for consumers with the technology um, for our own survival, actually. Because if you look at our auto business, unless we make the transition to electric successfully, it is going to be challenging times, which is why we've invested early. But these are very early days, certainly in India, perhaps a little less so in Europe and the US. It's very early days. Who's going to win? What's going to happen? Which technology is going to win out? Are we going to be on lithium ion forever? Will solid state or lithium sulfur or something else come in? We don't really know, but we'll see a lot of change. So watch this space.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that, Alexander. Thanks for that, Anirban. Arun, over to you. What is happening in the auto industry is exactly what's happening in the world of energy, as we know. You know, this is a dramatic shift from fossil-based energy production all the way through to renewables. And I think the Adani Group has done a phenomenal job in making that transition. And it's obviously an ongoing transition happening. How, in a very short period of time, Arun, would love to get your perspective on how you're seeing this transition panning out, because that goes back to the fundamental topic we're talking about today, which is sustainability and new business models. So it's really, how is this, you know, shift going to happen? You can't just, when I talk to CEOs of energy companies around the world, it's not like they can just switch off the, you know, billions of dollars invested in the nuclear plant or in the coal-based plant tomorrow. It's a lot of capex and value that exists. You can't just shut it down and shift to renewables. So I'd love to get your perspectives, how you're thinking about these new business models coming in, and how you're thinking about this transition.
Sure.
So
in electricity, India has an advantage. I hope that question was for me.
It was actually for Arun. Obviously,
Go
my
ahead,
pronunciation is not.
Arun, these auto guys are doing this to you all the time.
Arun, over to you.
No, I have enjoyed listening to all of you. So I would rather listen to you than speak, but I will take this question on. So I think, like, you know, one of the important things to understand is that transition is going to happen. And renewables, like, you know, India has shown the way that it can be done. And the Adani Group has been a participant and a leader in that transition. The fact of the matter remains that for a while, we are going to rely on baseload power. The beauty is that technology is providing us with a way to model demand, that over time, we don't need to build more thermal power stations. The same baseload power can multiply the renewable capacity in the grid at a significant level. And what you will see is that over time, thermal power stations, especially in case of India, will start being used for peaking power as more and more renewables come in. Some of them will come to the end of life. And then if green hydrogen becomes a reality, and for example, if green hydrogen came to $1 a kilogram, which is expected even in Europe by 2050, in India, it probably will be 2040, like, you know, even 80 cents. At 80 cents, it's coming to like, you know, $5 per MMBTU of natural gas, equivalent in energy. That problem is solved. But at that price, India also needs huge amounts of chemicals. India needs, like, you know, methanol. Now, the existing thermal power plants, a country like India can't shut everything down overnight, like, you know, but we can capture carbon dioxide. We can use the green hydrogen that is coming at one, like, you know, a cheaper price at a certain price point over the next decades, and then become a feedstock for the chemical industry. India is going to need 5 times more than anything that we have currently as the population reaches to a standard of living that the world has, or the developed world has taken for granted. So I think you're going to see the transition. I talked to Mr. Anil Sardana, and he's working very hard on, these questions, and the team is working. The promoters, the promoters are the biggest asset. And I have a theory. I say that promoter-driven companies will actually focus on sustainability and ESG even more than other companies, because there is a direct link between sustainability, ESG, and enterprise value. Okay.
Yeah.
So we are seeing that. We see that Tesla is a vote for green, green and sustainability, and to some extent, Adani Green's performance is somewhat linked to it, not on the same scale. So this is a transition. It is happening, and technology will play a very important role. And we'll all be learning from every other industry what BMW is doing, what Mahindra is doing, and adopt the technology that will help the transition.
Great. No, fantastic, gentlemen. We only have about 4 or 5 minutes left, so I just want to quickly wrap up by a few takeaways, and then in the meantime, what I'd like to do is finally, when we wrap up, get everybody to just give their one idea or one key thing that we in India or anywhere in the world should do to really drive sustainability, or a new business model that you suggest we should adopt. But before I go around the room and just get everybody's 1 minute idea or one sentence idea, I just want to quickly assess some of the key points that were said today. I think I love the fact, Alexander, like you said, which is quite fascinating, that for an automaker to look at supply chain, look at sustainability and ESG, not only from tier one, but all the way back to the source, is quite new and revealing. And it'll be fantastic to learn more about how BMW does that, because that could be a new lesson for all of us on how to drive sustainability, not only for ourselves, but across the supply chain. Second point around circular economy, it's fantastic to see how all large corporates are not only looking at about it today, but looking at it from a circular economy in terms of recycling, etc. I was fascinated to hear, Alexander, that your management compensation has also now tied to the goals that you all are setting in terms of ESG and sustainability. I love the fact that, that Arun, you mentioned about, in financing, we're going to need all kinds of capital, whether it's green bonds, whether it's sovereign wealth funds, whether it's pension funds. I think it's going to require globally to get a whole bunch of innovative financing to really drive sustainability and new business models going forward. The challenge is so large for the world that we're going to need all this capital that we're going to get. I think, Giovanni, wonderful to hear about the impact you're having in terms of the trains to really reduce carbon dioxide emissions, and especially the fact that you look at it not only from a trains perspective, but also in terms of other modes of transportation, whether it's roads or electric buses, etc. And seriously, Anirban, thanks a lot. I love the fact about the greening the business, the new business models, and most of it, I think it's going to take all the technologies that have to add to that value chain to create sustainability, whether it's storage, whether it's batteries, whether it's EV, etc. And lastly, I love the point that we need to create partnerships and an ecosystem, whether it's between big companies, Mahindra and Ford, or between large companies like Mahindra with startups, to bring everybody in that ecosystem. So again, I've got about literally a minute or two left. So I really, really appreciate everybody's input. I'd love to quickly go around the room. And if you don't mind, Alexander, I'll start with you with one idea that we should do either in India or globally to really drive sustainability and developing new business models, or something that you think is going to change the world going forward. Over to you, Alexander.
I think we're at an unprecedented time in history, and we need to take action now. So we need to get into the driver's seat. We see that regulation is coming as well, but I think the one idea would really be, how do we focus on developing a business model that is more mature, that is more elaborated than the ones we have built at the time where externalities have not been counted into? And how do we do this so we know all the science? So we now need to really find those business models, and we need to combine, and that's, I'm really convinced, a perspective from our head, but also from our hearts. Because if we don't fully go into this challenge, we won't be able to meet it. So time is running out. So it's now time to act.
Great, thanks. Arun, over to you.
I think the whole idea of transition bond is good, but I think the idea that I think that is very important is the transition is going to lead to a lot of displacement, whether it is the developed world, whether it is miners in Queensland, or people working in the thermal power stations in Germany. That will be a disruption. So will be in India. I grew up in Bihar, and the southern part of Bihar now is Jharkhand. I think we have to start thinking that India will transition to renewable energy. The world will finally get its act together. Adani Group will also get there. But how do we go there in a way that we create a transition that people who are displaced are taken care of? They're retrained for new economy. All this new economy that is coming, they have to have a role and a place there.
Thanks for that, Arun. Absolutely. Great point. Great point. Giovanni, over to you.
Thank you. I sent 3 words: innovation, technology, and safety. So innovation is mandatory. So we have to apply in India the best technology around the world. Technology, again, it's very, very important, but the most important is safety. Every mode of transport must be safe.
Thanks so much for that, Giovanni. Absolutely. Anirban, you got the last word.
If you are in a company that has not got started on sustainability, start. You will find that it is very beneficial for your business. If you are in a company that has already started, don't get intoxicated by initiatives. Build a program, set a goal, and move towards it. Keep asking the question that by doing this, is the company really becoming sustainable? Otherwise, we'll all get very carried away with the stories we built for ourselves. And Tejpreet, if you permit, I would like to share a bit of good news with Alexander. Alexander, your cars in India are made in an integrated city called the Mahindra World City. That's not the good news. The good news is that this Mahindra World City has been certified as being a zero waste to landfill city. Perhaps the largest urban area in India to be certified in this way. So anything that goes out of your factory, which is collected by our garbage collectors, gets recycled responsibly. You can add this to your responsibility story in BMW now.
Great. Listen, gentlemen, thank you so much. We're exactly out of time. It's exactly 4:30. So again, thank you very much. It's been a fascinating discussion. And it's wonderful to be able to, in this time of COVID, to get people from all over the world to come around one critical topic that we all believe in and we all really want to make a difference. So thanks very much, everybody. See you then. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.